I would like to begin by acknowledging Nana Kwabena Brown and Nana Kwesi Adjeman. It is indeed an honor to join them on this panel, How We Got Here and Where We Want to Go, Historical Understandings of Traditional Practices in America. On this subject of how we got here and where we want to go can be looked at from a linear perspective in terms of what happened first and second and so forth. That is important, but I want to discuss this from the standpoint of what inspired people to be part of Akom in the past and what are the implications for the future. I want to discuss something I call doorways, and by that I mean the manner in which people experience life events that prompted them to be part of Akom. As you may recall, in 2021, we did a chronicle on how Akom migrated from West Africa to America. It was an online conference entitled Commemoration to Okomfo Nana Akua Parabia, Her 50-Year Legacy. In that presentation, there were several narratives where Okomfo shared their personal journey. Recently, I reviewed those narratives and I was impressed with not only the rational thought process that led to the decision to be part of Akom, but also what was going on subconsciously. In some instances, things were taking place on a subconscious level that override conscious rational thought. I'm calling these events doorways. By that I mean things that were going on that the person was not consciously aware of and that played a role in helping the person reach the decision to be part of Akom. These doorways or points of entry were not just events per se. They were events intertwined with spiritual intervention. In discussing his personal journey to Akom, Nana Kwabena at one point said, art is not an art at all, but deeply religious pieces, unquote. So let's look at this in context. Nana Kwabena was brought up in a West Indian household and had some familiarity with obeah, which is practiced throughout the Caribbean. He did not know at the time that obeah could be traced back to Africa, but he had some notion that spiritual worship was part of his family background. He was also exposed to Black nationalism. Growing up in Harlem, his father introduced him to the Garvey movement as well as the Nation of Islam. This left an indelible impression on him to be proud of himself as a strong Black man, proud of himself as God made him. He grew up with pride in African culture. And then, of course, there was his last name, Brown. Brown was not a slave name. The name Brown was to remind him that he was the descendant of a warrior ancestor who rode with the historic liberator John Brown. This background inspired him to make the conscious decision to open up an art and clothing shop called Zero's House of Africa. This was the conscious decision that led to the subsequent events that further inspired him on an unconscious level. Surrounded by African art and clothing on a regular basis, he was stimulated to investigate Eastern religions. In retrospect, Nana Kwabena said in his narrative that, quote, art is not art at all, but deeply religious pieces, unquote. He said that African art is a conduit of Ashe, a life force. And in this case, that life force inspired a shift in consciousness to delve deeper and to study the spirituality of Tibetan and Hindu cultures. One thing led to another. A major turning point was that one day he met Nana Enka Ajibo Waldron. Nana Ajibo was number 2 in the first line of Okomfo initiated by Nana Dinizulu. But Nana Ajibo was not only a Okomfo, he was also a professional tailor. This was an interesting coincidence because not only was Nana Kwabena in the business of selling African clothing, his ancestors were also tailors. It was as though Nana Kwabena's ancestors prompted Nana Kwabena and Nana Ajabo to meet and engage in conversation about tailoring. That conversation led Nana Kwabena to being introduced to Nana Dinizulu, and what was initially an art and clothing shop eventually transformed into a place of studying African religion and making regular monthly trips to Bosom Jemawazi in New York, and the rest is history. All of this is relevant to answering the question of how we got here and where we want to go. In the example that I just provided, Nana Kwabena got to where he was going because the life force emanating from African art converged with his pride in African culture and inspired him to delve deeper. African art served as his doorway or port of entry to African spirituality. Let's look at another example. Okomfo Nana Quia Amoba Bochwe I also narrated her personal journey. She explained that she grew up in the Christian church and was well grounded as a religious person. But she always felt there was more to spirituality than just Bible teachings. While growing up in Queens, New York, she met a lady from Nigeria who showed her how to tie Yoruba head wraps. This same lady invited Nana Bochwe to an African dance class that was taught by Nana Dene Zulu. At the time, Nana Bochwe explained learning African dance was a fad, so she wanted to learn, and at the same time, she was just 16 years old and was searching. As part of Nana Dene Zulu's dance troupe, she met Chief Bey, Olatunji, Oba Osurjiman Adefuni, and Chuck Davis, all of whom were dynamic African drummers. Inevitably, this led to invitations to attend bimbes and learning about Shango. She was receptive because she was searching and trying to get a handle on her worldview. She accompanied Nana Dene Zulu on his second trip to Ghana, during which she visited Larte, and the rest is history. In this example, the doorway took the form of African dance. It was African dance that served as Nana Bochwe's port of entry to African religion. Those of us who have experienced African dance can all attest to the power of the drums. All of us can attest to the dynamic energy of African drum and being touched by spirit while dancing. And then there are examples where Akom itself served as a doorway. In the case of Nana Akosua Kodia Dunyu Ababio, she grew up in a traditional Gullah home in South Carolina. In her narrative, she talked about the traditional ritual that took place after being born in the family home. She talked about things happening at night, spirits moving around the house. This was considered normal in Gullah household. She talked about the traditional funerals and wake-keeping rituals which took place at the house, and how the rocking chair would move as a sign that someone was getting ready to make transition. All of this was part of her early years as a child. She was even insulated from the English language. She only spoke Gullah or Geechee during her first 6.5 years of life. Her insulation from outside culture was so extensive that she thought Gullah was the national language and that all Americans spoke Gullah. She wasn't exposed to English until she moved to New York when she was 6.5 years old. Even though she was raised as a strict Christian, things would come out at night, but her mother told her not to worry about them. Her grandmother who raised her used to pick herbs from the backyard for healing. They didn't go to doctors. After moving to New York, she learned English and she eventually attended college and majored in African American history. She was first introduced to African religion in 1969 by a dance teacher who had been initiated by Nana Dene Zulu. The dance teacher invited her to come to spiritual ceremonies in New York City, but Nana Kodia refused because she had negative preconceptions of what that was all about. In 1971, she relented and attended a funeral rite presided over by Nana Dene Zulu. She left, quote, wanting to know more, unquote. Subsequently, she attended an Akom and met Nana Aparibia. She explained that the way it went down was that she was sitting in the back, hoping not to be noticed. However, she was beckoned to come out and try and dance. Spirit began to come on her while dancing. She left the event vowing, quote, "No, I'm not coming back. I want to get away from this," unquote. She even called the lady who invited her a few days later to inform her that she was not coming back. Nonetheless, a few months later, she decided to go again, and the rest is history. When I asked Nanakodia what made her finally decide to be part of Akom despite initial reservation, she said, quote, "It made me feel happy. It made me feel good. I was happy. Like the Abasun lifted me up. It scared me, but intrigued me to try and understand what was going on. The drums were beautiful, but I could not understand why I didn't have control over myself," unquote. In addition to all this, there was Nana Denizulu's persona. She said she found him soft-spoken and kind. She said everything fell in place. Being part of Basum Jemawazi, she could identify as an African and being more than the descendant of slaves. She was thirsting for information to be part of something that came from the motherland. And she was made to feel comfortable by Nana Denizulu's wives. Two important factors were at play here in terms of how Nana Kodia got on the path. Obviously, there was the spiritual energy of Akom, an energy that overrode her intellectual predisposition. In addition, there was the character of the people involved. Both, I would say, played an important role in helping Nana Kodia overcome her initial reservations. In my own case, speaking for myself, my road was complicated and intricate. But one factor that stood out most was the character of the people. I was in my 30s. I had already been exposed to metaphysics and spiritual studies. I knew how to meditate. I practiced yoga. I had already changed my diet. I had already been to the Andes in Peru on a spiritual sojourn. So I already had a significant background in spirituality when I was first exposed to Akom. In retrospect, I would say that I chose Akom because of the character of the people that I met at the time. I'm talking about Nana Kwabena Brown, Okomfo Penyon, Nana Karantama, and Ankabia Nana Aparibia the Queen. I was impressed by how they carried themselves, their integrity, their knowledge and wisdom. This was my doorway to Akom and what ultimately led me to be here today. Let's look at another example involving Akom. Okomfo Adontahema Nana Chidwa Ansa II is both a priest to Tigray and also a Hema living in Ghana. Her journey began when she was very rooted in the Pentecostal church. She was part of a long line of ancestors who were seers, prophets, midwives, and medicine women. She was raised by her grandmother, who was the first female evangelist to preach from the pulpit of the Church of God in Christ in Memphis, Tennessee. Her grandmother, as Nana put it, quote, taught her how to worship the living God, unquote. They were very disciplined in their worship. They attended church services 3 times a week. But more importantly, as a matter of routine, they prayed every day at noon, every noonday. And after they prayed, they would go out and visit the sick and the shut-in. One thing led to the other, and one day she saw a flyer at Ujima Shule in Washington, D.C. about a tour to Ghana. At the time, Nana was raw to the culture. She didn't know anything about Nana Denizulu, the Akans, or Akom, so she didn't really know what this tour was about. Nonetheless, she paid the fee to join the tour 1 week before departure. During the course of the tour, they visited the chief's palace in Elmina. As Nana recalled, she was not paying attention to what was going on. She was preoccupied with taking pictures of the fine men, what she called eye candy. She wasn't paying attention to the ceremony. The next thing she knew, quote, suddenly she was up in the air and people were throwing powder on her, unquote. She was upset, but they calmed her down and set her on a stool 3 times and immediately installed her as a queen mother. She went along with swearing an oath to the chief. Later on, she was informed that she was the reincarnation of someone that had recently passed. As Nana puts it, quote, I was in shock, unquote. But she was now an official part of the chief's family. The tour continued, and she attended a Durbar and a go-go. She sat behind Nana Dinizulu and again was preoccupied with taking pictures of eye candy. She remembered nothing that happened next. She only remembered waking up, screaming and crying on the bus. She didn't know what happened. She was just screaming and crying. She was very upset. The sisters calmed her down and told her that she had been possessed by a deity and danced all over the place. She responded, quote, wait a minute, nothing can possess me. I'm a child of God. God is within me and no devil possession can happen to me. What are you talking about? Unquote. And the rest is history. Today, Nana is Okomfo de Tigray and Ahema living in Elmina. I recommend that you listen to the entirety of her narrative. It's a very interesting journey. This is an example of a comb as a doorway, a path of entry. Of course, destiny plays an important role here. Many of the people I talked to, no doubt, were destined to be part of a comb. But destiny, as you know, is fragile. Some people do not walk the path of their destiny, and some do. It is our job as a Okomfo to make sure that those who are destined to walk the path of a comb find their way. I want to give 2 more examples in the time remaining. The doorway for Abrafaheni Nana Alukwesu Kwao. This doorway resembles placing a stone in an oyster. It causes an irritation, but the final result is a pearl. Nana Alukwesu grew up as a devout member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. But there came a time when the teachings of the Bible conflicted with the teachings of Pan-African scholars such as Chancellor Williams, Ivan van Sertima, and Joseph ben Jochanan, and others that he was reading. While in college, he joined a Black study group and did a deep dive into the study of Black history. At the same time, he had held on to his Christian practices. He continued to attend church on a regular basis. If necessary, he would walk 3 miles in the hot sun to attend Sunday service. But as he continued to study African history, the contradictions between the teachings of the Bible and a correct understanding of African history became more apparent. On one hand, he was motivated to continue his studies of African history, and on the other hand, he felt the need to hold on to his Christian upbringing. This dichotomy created a mental dissonance and became so severe that it began to show up in his dreams. He began having frequent dreams of swimming in turbulent waters. The waters in the dream were always troublesome and turbulent. So one day he was led to pray for guidance, and he made the conscious decision to let go of Christianity. That following night, he dreamed of swimming in clear and calm waters, and that was the confirmation he needed. And he has been on the path of African spirituality ever since. So the doorway in this example was coming face to face with the irreconcilable differences in the kind of life he wanted to lead. Being torn in 2 directions disturbed him, both while awake and asleep. So being uncomfortable was his doorway. So now let's turn to Nana Kwesi Amoah. Nana Kwesi began his narrative talking about there's no separation between spirit and the physical. And he applied this understanding to his profession as well. As many of us may be, as many of us may be aware, he has a doctorate in organic chemistry. He is also a priest to the Suman of Brafo Atenka. Nana Kwesi grew up in the culture. He knew Nana Ninizulu at an early age. It was Nana Kodia who initiated him and was like a mother to him. So, having grown up in the culture, that was his reality from the very beginning. African spirituality was a given. There came a time when he had to integrate spirituality into his profession as a chemist. So, while conducting some research, he ran into an impasse while attempting to synthesize a chemical compound. He was unsuccessful until he began to rely upon a set of spiritual numbers as part of his formula instead of the numerical ratios that were part of the prescribed protocol. Relying upon a spiritually inspired numerical formula, he was successful. His success came as a result of tuning into a level of consciousness that resides in a simple molecular organic compound. By allowing his communication with the molecules to inspire him, he was able to complete the experiment. This is heavy because if we could all tune into consciousness, no matter its form, we would be in a better position to heal the planet. We would be able to be in a better position to prevent floods, hurricanes, and earthquakes from occurring. We must learn to allow Mother Earth to teach us her technology. If we respect her, we will be much further along as a race of people. And so the doorway here took the form of an impasse and coming to the realization that the only way to move forward was to listen to spirit and not allow Western programming to mentally differentiate between life as spirit and life as physical objects. To come to the realization that God resides in all things and that we must learn to listen to God in all its various manifestations. So, returning to the theme of this panel, how we got here and where we want to go, I think we need to understand that there are many doorways that have led us to where we are now. We've talked about art in the form of music and dance as a conduit for spiritual energy. We've talked about Akom. We've talked about the driving need to get a handle on reality. All of these serve as doorways or ports of entry that led us to African spirituality. An African spirituality that provides answers and knowledge and wisdom. A place that embodies truths that date back to thousands and thousands of years. A place where we feel at home. A place where we find resolution to quandaries. In terms of where we want to go, I would say we need to be mindful of how doorways or ports of entries have played an active role bringing our people to African traditional religion. We need to not only be mindful of these doorways, but we must also be intentional in how we utilize them. So my hat is off to the sisters who have gone out of their way to learn the shrine songs and perform them authentically at our Akom. This makes a difference. My hat is off to their Cherama who have mastered the drums and energized our Akoms with spirit. My hat is off to those who organize Akoms and their African dance performances. All these things have served to get us to where we are. My hat is off to Akom Kese and the African Traditional Spiritual Coalition for organizing informative conferences combined with ritual. I would like to end by saying we need to be very mindful that we demonstrate good character at all times. How we carry ourselves in public and in private, demonstrating honesty, integrity, respect, and humility is very important because people are watching. and on the basis of their observation, they are making judgments and decisions. I give thanks.